the GCA. Welcome to the GCA program for the online safety of journalists in Africa. As Kaylee said, my name is Shehzad Mirza. I am the director of IT and security operations here at Global CyberAlliance. I also do a few other things in terms of responsibilities for DMARC, IoT, and so on. So just to give you a quick introduction in terms of who Global CyberAlliance is. So Global CyberAlliance, we're a not-for-profit organization that's based out of New York City, London, and Belgium. And we're really responsible to take a look at what are the different gaps in cybersecurity on a global scale. Right. So, what are the little things that are missing? So we're not in like necessarily another advisory type group. So we're not going to tell you that there's new vulnerabilities, but we're going to tell you that, hey, there's this tool that you can use and you need to be using it in order to better secure your environment. And it's a tool that most people don't really think about implementing or putting into place, or they don't really focus on these kinds of things. So we do have various types of information that you can get from our website in terms of different projects that we're working on and some other things as well. I'll also be talking about some of those products as we go along in these next two sessions. And so that we can see what types of things that we have and things that we share. And obviously the main focus that we're going to have on in these two sessions is going to be around our cybersecurity toolkit for journalists. So there'll be different parts that I'm going to talk. I'm not going to necessarily focus directly on the toolkit itself. If we do have some time, towards the end of each session, maybe I'll give you a quick preview or a quick look at the site itself. But the idea is to give you really a scope of what's going on. What are the things in a general high-level view that you need to focus on? And yeah, sorry, there's one slide here. So in terms of our founders, so we were founded by the City of London Police, the District Attorney of New York County, or really Manhattan, and then the Center for Internet Security as well. Now, again, like I said, our main focus is going to be on the cybersecurity toolkit for journalists. So if you do have any questions as we go along, we do have questions and answer after each section. But feel free to post the questions that you may have in our chat window as well. So you should be able to go in that chat, type in your message, type in the questions that you may have. And if I see it and it's relevant to the section that we're in, I'll go ahead and answer that question during that session rather than waiting towards the end. That's just in case if there's not enough time. So I want to be able to answer some questions. If I can't answer the question during that time when I see it, I'll make sure to try to get back to it when we get into the questions and answer section of the session of each of the sessions. So our goal here is, again, we're going to talk about cyber risk and what are some factors and some things that you can do to help mitigate those risks. So the first thing is you need to have a good understanding of what cyber risks are. What does it mean to have a cyber risk, and what do they do, and how are certain attacks that occur around cyber risk? Right? Cyber risk is how your organization or individual is susceptible to a particular type of cyber security attack. And there are many forms in which these attacks can take advantage of on an individual basis or on an organizational level basis. Right? So in terms of just using operating systems, using your Windows machine, your Mac operating system, or even a Linux machine, there are going to, and any type of applications or software that might be running on it are going to have holes in them. Right? They're going to have backdoors that a developer may have created, and the purpose of the developer to create it was to be able to get in and be able to fix or adjust the code, or be able to allow for updates to occur. So there might be some unguarded ways that that they put in on purpose, but from their point of view, the developer's point of view is to benefit it, not necessarily be used as a mechanism for an attack. One of the most common ways an attack occurs is phishing email. Right? Guaranteed at least once a day, if not once a week, you're getting at least some form of phishing or spam type email in your inbox, especially as an individual. And your Gmail accounts and Yahoo accounts, I mean, I get them constantly in my Yahoo account and then also in my Gmail account as well. And I'm starting to see a little bit more and more phishing emails even on our work account. even though we have secure mechanisms in place to help protect against phishing types of email, but they're still getting through. Right, and the phishing email leads to other forms of attacks. You click on a link, you end up, supply additional information, giving your username and passwords, or giving a banking account information, or giving some sort of personal identifiable information in these phishing emails. Or you download a link and you download an attachment, and that attachment has some sort of malware that's running in the background, could lead to ransomware or other types of keylogger type of activity. Vulnerabilities. So it kind of goes back to the open doors, right? There's a flaw in this software, but this is something that the developer may have not intentionally put in. They just didn't think of it as being used as a flaw in that particular software operating system. And this is why you see, like, on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, a lot of applications or operating systems are being constantly patched, right? Like Microsoft Patch Tuesday, as we like to call it, right? I believe it's now the second Tuesday of every month, where Microsoft is pushing out their patches to their operating systems or to Microsoft Office. Adobe actually follows suit as well. Malware, right? Malware is going to be a key way of taking advantage of different types of machines. And that malware can be things like ransomware, right? The machine is infected with ransomware. You can't use that machine in any way. Next thing you know, it's not only your machine and within the organization, it's other machines now, because that piece of malware is now going through and infecting other machines and other systems. Then user compliancy as well, right? Because in terms of the users, especially on an individual basis, you know what? I don't need a patch right now. I don't need to update my machine. I can do that tomorrow. I need to do some work, right? As a journalist, from a journalist perspective, right? You have a due date. I can't do the patch right now. I'll have to wait till tomorrow. But they get everything done, everything's completed, but they forget to do that update or patch the next day. Right? Or just say, don't get phishing emails. I haven't seen a phishing email in days, so that's never going to happen to me. I'm never going to click on that link, but you never know. Some things like that happen. But the key thing is when it comes to these types of attackers, they don't have to be, they don't have to have a big knowledge in terms of like development or how operating system works or how networks work and things like that. They don't need to be advanced in that sense, right? Because then a common user can go online and they can buy or rent these types of attacks, right? There's services that can be done. You just click on a button and put in an IP address or put in an email address, right? And it sends out the phishing email, or it does some sort of attack against that machine. They don't have to do anything. They just run a few buttons or run a wizard, right? So they don't have, it doesn't have to be a sophisticated attacker. It could be a simple attacker, like a script kiddie, right? That's what they call script kiddies. They just run a script and, answer a few questions. The script runs and it does what it needs to do. Now, as we go along, we're going to talk about different aspects in terms of what you need to do and help to improve cyber risk and cybersecurity, but again, from a journalist perspective. So we're going to use a case study, which is a KQED, which is a small journalist organization that's in the US. So they do have a newsroom. So they do on-air, journalism, but they were susceptible to cyber risk, and so they had a major cybersecurity hit on their organization. So what happened to KQED? So in 2017, so reporters reported that their computers shutting off at random all day. So something was on their systems that was causing those systems to continuously shut down. Even though they turned them back on, they would keep shutting down. But what ended up happening is that it was a ransomware attack that impacted them. So the ransomware attack was called Samaz. It demanded Bitcoin to release the files on computers unless they paid $27,000 for the lot, for all the machines. But now you think about it, what does ransomware do? It renders your machine basically ineffective. You can no longer use that machine at that point in time, right? So now how does that impact us as an organization, right? Everything. So their streaming servers, their archives, their data storages, and so on, they were completely inaccessible. 503 employees no longer had access to their work phones or their computers. So now how does that impact it? These are people who have to go on live TV, right? They have all their things are locked up. what are they supposed to do at that point? Right? So they had to actually revert back to written notes, right? They had to go back to pen and paper. So the IT team, only consisting of 9 people, told those their employees, go to writing handwritten notes and passing them out desk to desk. So that has a huge impact on them, right? As in many aspects, in financial aspect as well, right? Because it's not only $27,000 that they're going to have to pay for this to get there to release all these computers, but what is the cost of the loss of the machine, the downtime that they're dealing with? So at that point, with this type of infection, their TV studio was rendered completely inoperable. Right? So that has a huge impact on any type of organization, right? This might have been a small, journalist type organization, but it had a big impact on them, right? All work was done on personal laptops with hotspots on personal cell phones. So they're costing employees money at that point. And then the loss of the information that they had on their work machines, not going to be on their personal laptops. Right? Scripts had to be printed by inserting a USB disk into a printer. That's assuming that they had the scripts in place, or they had to rewrite, somebody had to rewrite all of these scripts. Right? The audience was only able to listen to the radio on a physical FM radio or television, not streamed online. So it's strictly audio because their TV studio was rendered inoperable. So they had to revert back to an FM radio. Right. And in most places around the world, FM radios, nobody actually has one of those anymore. Right. Radio stories were entirely narrated by reporters without sound bites or recording interviews with the sources. Right. Because what do you see when you watch news or you listen to news, even on the radio? Right? It's not just one person speaking. They're speaking, but then they have little snippets of an interview or of a recording of some sort of activity that's going on, because that makes it more interesting. That piques the interest in, but they no longer had those because they were all locked up by the ransomware. So now at some point, what they realized, okay, they were doing this, but they had to find another TV studio. So they had to go and borrow a TV studio across town so they can broadcast their news. They most likely had to pay for that as well. Right? And then the cost to fix their environment, right? $475,000 was spent to fix the network and hiring help. So it wasn't only the $27,000 from the ransomware activity, but also another $475,000 on top of that. So almost $500,000 was spent just to get this fixed because they didn't take the right security precautions from the get-go. And they didn't understand or take that's a cybersecurity risk. Or even if they did, they probably even thought, oh, don't worry about it. We'll wait till the next day. Or not everyone's machines are being patched. They'll get patched at some point in time. So this is where now we're going to get into the different aspects of the toolkit, because it's going to be important that there are different aspects you need to know about while you're working through and making sure that your environment is secure. Whether you've started off already, or even if you haven't started off, it's a nice good practice just to go through these steps to make sure that you make sure that you have everything in place, because there might be something that you may have not thought about as you went through this. And this is where now it's going to get close to what we're doing in terms of the cybersecurity toolkit for journalists. So I'm going in a specific order. And this is what we recommend as an order in order to get to what you need to get to. And I'll explain why each one of these and why we go in this kind of order when you're working and you're focusing on cybersecurity. So the first thing is to know what you have, right? Because how are you going to protect something if you don't know you have it, whether or not you have it, right? Because you may only be familiar with a few types of tools that may be available to you, or systems that are in place and applications, but it does get more and more difficult depending on the type of situation that you're in, right? So you can't protect what you don't know about or what you don't know you have. So you need to know what is your IT environment. So if you have a networking type of environment, what is connected to that network? Do you have servers? Do you have laptops? Are there just desktops? Do you have any type of tablets or mobile devices connected to that network? Right, then you also not only those types of devices, but you also want to know is what kind of networking devices do you have in place? Do you have a firewall? Do you have a wireless access point or do you have a wireless router or a wired router? Those things are important to know. right? But not only know what is on your network, but also who is on your network, who has access to things on your network. So you need to take into account accounts, right? You need to know what user accounts that you have in your environment, because that's going to tell you who is going to access or what level of access they may have, right? Because how many of them are administrators? How many of them are power users? How many of them are just regular users, right? How many of them can access certain servers, right? You know, and you're not necessarily, as an IT person, you're probably not going to be doing this on, you're definitely not going to do this on your own. You're going to need the help of your employees or your fellow staff members, right? You may have to talk to the managers and say, okay, who is on your team and who on your team needs access to what? Can we confirm that they're accessing the right files, right? Should they have access to everything on the network, or should they only have access to limited things? Right, but then take into account some of the other things that might be sitting around as well, right? Is there old equipment? You know, because there could be some, because there have been cases where people have all these different things in place, but then they find this one computer that they don't know where it is and who is actually using it, and it looks like to be very vulnerable. And then they end up finding that they're like in a closet somewhere way in the back where nobody really goes to. There was a computer sitting there that's outdated, that has a really old operating system running really old applications, but it's sitting back there, maybe running some sort of commands just to make sure things are running correctly, or like, you know, maybe some code to just kind of, you know, check certain things that are going on the environment. But it needs to be updated, right? Or it needs to be removed. You know, do you have CCTVs? Are there, you know, and also take into account business partners. Do you have consultants that come into your environment and connect to your network? And then if they do connect to your network, what do they have access to? So really, when it comes to your environment, knowing what you have, anything that you have that connects to the internet, anything that connects to your network, anything that connects to the internet, whether it be your own staff, external staff, consultants, or anyone who else is coming in, printers, email, any applications and things like that. Know what you have. Because what's going to be important is because who actually needs access to this? What level of access do they need? Right? From a journalist perspective, if they need to make a specific deadlines, who needs that level and what level of access do they need in order to make those deadlines? Right? And what you should do at most is set a minimum access levels for effective productivity. That's a rule you should take into account. Don't just give everyone admin access, because that's a problem. That's something that KQED actually faced, because all their users were admins on their own machines. And that's a serious issue, because if they're an admin, they can install whatever they want. They can do whatever they want. So if malware is infecting that user, that malware is going to install using that user's account. And that if that account also has admin privileges and they get the username and password for that account, then they can spread and move on and pivot to other systems as well. So restrict access. And typically in most cases, you're an admin user or not. In some cases, there might be a guest account. Right? But everyone should set to at least a user, right? They shouldn't be admin. Only the IT department should be set to admins, right? Because that'll help reduce potential damage, right? Because you have things like insider threats, whether it's unintentional or accidental, right? Because an insider threat doesn't have to be intentional. Right? When it's intentional, they're deliberately doing something, right? They stole information. They're blackmailing the organization because of this negative information that they found on the environment. But it could also be accidental, right? If somebody accidentally clicks on a phishing email, they click on the link because they weren't aware that was a phishing email, or they by accidentally deleted something that they shouldn't have deleted to because they shouldn't have had access to it. Right? Or if they click on that phishing email or open up attachment that has malware in there, it can corrupt the data that wasn't on purpose, right? Or if they happen to drop the laptop, right? Or if, you know, they drop the laptop and the laptop gets damaged, that's accidental. Another thing you can do is, if you're in an organization type environment, right, or business type of environment, you can actually physically segment devices, right? So you can put all your employees onto one network and then put your servers on another network, put your IoT devices on another network, and then only give access as needed to the appropriate parties. But take into account also third parties, right? We mentioned the consultants, because consultants could come into your environment, plug in, and for all you know, that their systems could be actually infected, and they're not aware of it, right? Or they could deliberately do something. Maybe they are aware of it, or they know how to, take advantage of things within a person's environment. They're gonna just out of curiosity go through and say, hey, I have access to this server. Let's see what's on the server. So be careful of those kinds of things and make sure you have these restrictions to only give access to whatever access they need. So if a third party comes in, have a guest network, and they only have access to the guest network, and the guest network is not connected to your network, your organization's network in any way. So those are things you need to take into account when in terms of knowing what you have and what you have in your environment. And those are just some examples of things. So I'll pause for a little bit here, give a couple minutes. If you have a question, please feel free to post a question in the chat window there. And then, I'll answer any questions that you may have. If not, then I'll keep moving on. All right, I don't see any questions. So just keep within questions. Again, we can post them in the chat window. We'll have Q&A after each session, each one of these sections as we go along. So the next thing is now, okay, now you know what you have. You're familiar with your environment. You know what accounts that you have. You know which old accounts you have, and you get rid of the old accounts. You know which systems you have. You find old equipment. Hopefully you update those or remove those old equipment. But what you want to do now is you want to update your defenses. So, right, because that's why you want to know what applications are running on those machines. This is why you want to know what operating system versions are running on those machines. It shouldn't be just, okay, we have 10 Windows machines, we have 10 Macs, and we have 2 Linux servers. That's not enough, right? Because you need to know what exactly is running it. Are you running Windows XP? Are you running Windows 10? Is it running Windows Server with Windows Exchange or DNS on it? Those things matter. And that's where you're going to need to know, okay, does it need to have updates? Are the updates that are on the operating system and even with the application? Because those are the things that attackers are looking for. They're looking for weaknesses and flaws on your systems. And typically those weaknesses and flaws are in the operating system itself, or they're in the applications that are running on there. Right? And it could also be technically a user as well. But here we're talking about in terms of technical aspects of it. Right? And these are the vulnerabilities that we constantly hear about. And this is where, once they take advantage of these vulnerabilities, now they have access to your information. They have access to your computer. Then from your computer, they can access to somebody else's computer if they're on an organizational network. Right? And imagine that if you're as a journalist, they take over your machine, they start deleting your sources, right? They just start deleting all of your contacts, right? The huge, journalist paper that you're gonna write that could win you an award, that's all gone. All that information is gone at that point because they have access to it and they took advantage of it because you did not update that machine or you did not update the applications on that machine, right? If it's a financial officer, they steal all your banking information. They could bankrupt your organization right away. So that's why patching and updating is very important. It's something that needs to be done. It should be done on a regular basis. Right? So that's one way of protecting what you have. Right? But make sure when you get these updates and patches, get it by the manufacturers and the developers of the application. Don't go to some random third-party website and just get a Windows patch. The Windows patches should only be gotten or received from Microsoft, nobody else. And that's the nice thing about a lot of the operating systems, a lot of applications, they will allow for auto updating. Right? You just have to make sure it's set to auto update. Right? And there is some level of recommendation in an organization-wide environment to maybe wait a day or two in terms of patches and pushing out patches to the organization. That's as long as you test one machine. So you have one machine, the patches are released, you tested all the patches on that one machine, everything on that machine is running fine. Then the next day you push out the patches to the rest of the organization. You shouldn't wait too long. But one thing that will help in terms of updates and patches as well is that if there's applications on that computer that are unnecessary, get rid of them. Right? If your journalist doesn't need to have 3 different instant messaging type software, remove them. Only put the one that's being used. Right? If they don't need Adobe Photoshop, remove it. If they don't need Microsoft Outlook, remove it. If they don't need Microsoft Excel, remove it. Right? Remove any applications that are unnecessary, because then that way you don't have to worry about patching or updating all these machines. You're just updating what is necessary and what they're actually using on there, and everything else is removed from that machine. But also take into account things that are end of life and unsupported, right? Because at some point in time, Microsoft says like, we're no longer supporting Windows XP. And when they no longer support Windows XP, that means there's no more updates and patches. But that doesn't mean that the machine is going to be secure. Attackers are still going to go after that machine and look at the different holes and vulnerabilities on there. But you're not going to get patches or updates for that, because Microsoft is that we've moved on. You need to be upgrading to Windows 7 or Windows 10 at that point. So this is something that, again, occurred going back to with KQED. They had dated defenses, right? Who was responsible for updating and patching their own machines? Employees were, right? But that shouldn't be an employee's responsibility. That should be the IT department's responsibility to push out these patches to all these as soon as they arrive, right? Because again, the employees, if the journalists and they're in the middle of writing a news article, or writing, like they're really focused on this, they're not going to update it. They're going to ignore the updates and keep pushing off the updates, and they're not going to think about the update the next day or within a week later. Right? That's the responsibility of the IT department. They should be the ones responsible for pushing out patches. It shouldn't be on the employee. IT staff were trained in broadcast infrastructure. So their focus was how the network worked, how the broadcasting infrastructure worked. Their focus was not on security or what the latest security threats were, latest security issues were. So maybe that IT staff, so in this case, the IT staff should be aware of have some level of security knowledge, or maybe they needed to have like a security officer in place, or someone who's responsible for security operations. Then the other thing was the entire organization used over-the-counter consumer antivirus software, which is fine. But then again, who's responsible for making sure that that consumer antivirus software is up to date? The employees are. But again, they're not the ones who are going to think about updating that software. They just going to think, oh, we have antivirus, it's fine, we're good. We don't need to worry about any of the updates or anything like that. Right, so that in itself, it becomes a problem, becomes an issue. Right, because the employees aren't thinking about IT aspects, they're focused on their job. Whereas the IT department is the one who needs to make sure that all the systems are secure and working. And the other issue that ends up being is when the security consultant that was working on this found that, again, also people had different antiviruses on there on each machine. So there was a little bit hard to control. And if they didn't have the right antivirus program on there, it didn't recognize the virus variant, right? Because it found that just 10 out of the 60 off-the-shelf antivirus programs recognized the virus variant of that hit that hit the company. So if one of these, so this obviously went through because some employees just had a different off-the-shelf antivirus program, right? They probably got the cheapest one that was available to it. That's not really that secure, really that great. But if the organization just chose one that was a little bit more higher grade or higher level, that's in more of a business level antivirus, they probably would have been protected, and it most likely would have recognized that virus variant that hit the company and could have prevented this ransomware infection. So that's why, again, it's important that, update your defenses, right? Because again, those other 40 that were, or 50 that were off the shelf that didn't recognize it probably could be because the signature wasn't updated, right? They probably just needed an update, but nobody updated those antivirus software programs therefore it didn't see that information. So updating your systems, updating your applications is very important. And again, it shouldn't be just your desktops. It should be your laptops. It should be your tablets. It should be your smartphones, your mobile devices, printers, anything that's on the internet, most likely or connected or can communicate in some fashion, will need some level of an update. So again, any questions? So common misconception that iOS systems cannot be hacked. I'm assuming IoT systems. So yeah, any devices can be hacked. An IoT device can be hacked. And it's mainly because there might not be an update or it has a default password or something that's in there that somebody didn't use it to protect, right? So it may not be necessarily the device itself, but in some cases it could be just for the user. And this kind of goes on to the next segment that I'm going to talk about a little bit in terms of passwords, right? So like Nest devices. So the Nest camera, this was in the news a couple of years ago, right? That Nest was that somebody hacked the Nest. They didn't really necessarily hack the Nest device, but what they actually did was they figured out the username and password in order to access a Nest device, and they were able to talk to somebody's child through that. Right, and that's scary. Because they can watch, they can see that child, and they can talk to that child through that. And it was something that picked up some speed in terms of other people were trying it out and doing it, and they were successful. They can actually watch people through that. And what did Nest do in that case? They basically added another layer of protection to prevent that. But again, it's up to the user to make sure that they put in the right techniques and mechanisms in place to protect those IoT devices, right? To make sure they get updated. And one of the key things is, and this is what I'll talk about now, is beyond simple passwords. Right, because many systems and many devices are simply protected, or in order to gain access to it is to put in your username and to put in your password. But it's also one of the common methods criminals will use to gain access to your accounts, networks, and information, right? Because what's the best way to do it but to log in as you, right? And people use very simple passwords. The top 10 still has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? ABC 1, 2, 3. Those are exclamation. Those are still there. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Those are still in the top 10, which is still shocking. And the past several years. The list really hasn't changed that much. So you want to make sure you use a strong password, and I'll talk about what strong passwords are. But there's some things you have to take into account with those passwords as well. Are you using the same password across multiple accounts, right? And not just business accounts, right? Are you using the same password that you use for work for your Facebook account, for your Netflix account, right? For your Twitter account, because those are the ones that are going to go after first, right? They're not necessarily going to go after your business account first. They're going to go after these social media type accounts because they feel that those are a little bit more easier to try to get, because they can ask you multiple questions. They can post Facebook things like, hey, answer these questions and you'll get a prize. And you don't get a prize, but you answered all these questions that were all about you. But the goal is to get that password, because once they have that password, now they already know your email because it's on Facebook or wherever account. You got your email, and they're going to try that email password combination across different things. Then eventually, if they find out, oh, hey, this is where they work and this is their business email, let's try that same password there and see what happens, right? So it's possible for access to one account to give you access for the attacker access to all other accounts. I know it's not easy to remember multiple passwords, but do not use the same password with all your accounts, right? Because it's faster. Computers have increased in speed over time, right? Your smartphones, in most cases, might be faster than your own laptop or your own desktop, right? And the speed of these to easily go through the process of cracking passwords and breaking passwords is getting easier and easier to do. And you don't need any special tools. You just need a few simple things to do in order to get this. But what are some ways that your passwords can be cracked? One could be social engineering, right? Tricking you into revealing a password. You get a phone call saying that we're so-and-so from your bank, but we need to be able to get into, we're seeing that you're, an X amount of dollars were taken from your account and paid to this. Is this correct? And most likely not going to be correct. And you're going to say, no, it's not. Okay, well, in order for me to cancel this transaction, I need to know your social security number. I need to know your routing number to confirm that this is the right bank account, things like that. And you're getting, in most cases, people will give that. Right. And it could also be from a phishing email as well. But the thing is, you have to remember, right? Banks will never ask for your password. Right? Banks shouldn't even ask for your routing information, right? They should know all of that information already. The most they may ask is for like the last 4 digits of something, right? Or the last 3 digits of something in order to just to confirm, because they should know the rest of it, and they shouldn't know the rest of it, depending on who you're talking to. But never give out your password or parts of it or anyone. Don't answer questions. Who is your favorite pet? Who is your favorite sports team? Don't answer those questions. Because that's what they're using those, because those are things that they can use to potentially guess your password, right? Manual guessing, that leads to manual guessing, right? They'll look up personal information, right? They'll look for your Facebook account. They'll look for your Twitter account. They'll look for your LinkedIn account. They'll look in social media and do some research about you and find out names, dates of birth, pet names, sports teams, and so on. Right? So you have to be careful about that. What does the web and social media say about you? What kind of information are you giving out to people freely? Right? And any of that information that you're giving out freely, don't use that for a password. Right? If your favorite team happens to be, and the only reason I'm saying Real Madrid is because of what's going on with Ronaldo and soccer. But, it happens to be Real Madrid, and don't use that. Real Madrid shouldn't be your password. It shouldn't be any form of that or anything like, so be careful of those kinds of things. Shoulder surfing, right? You're in a coffee shop, you're in a hotel, you're in an airport, right? Who's behind you? Who's looking over your shoulder to see what's going on? They may not look directly over your shoulder, but are they within vicinity or close enough to be able to look at your username or what you're typing on your laptop? Right? And I've seen that in many cases. I'll be sitting sitting in a plane, and planes, right? The seats are very close, so you can easily see what the next person next to you is doing. And you don't have to look. You don't have to go like this. You don't have to, stretch your head over. You can just tilt your head. You just look over a little bit, and you can see all the work that they're doing. Right. So have like a privacy screen on there. Interception. So passwords can be intercepted, right? So if you're on a network, on an untrusted network, right, it can, people can be on that network and sniffing for network traffic. If you've ever heard of Black Hat and DEF CON, it occurs in the US. There's basically their hacker conventions. There's supposed to be white hat hacker conventions, but and what happens, it's surprising too, because I've gone to one several years ago, and what they do is that on those conventions, they have fake Wi-Fi hotspots in place. And they're people intercepting traffic and looking for username and passwords. And they have a screen on one of their conference rooms. And on the screen, projected up on the wall, they have username and passwords. But the passwords are starred out. So that way, because they don't want just anyone taking it. So they're being somewhat respectful. But they're putting up usernames, the full username, but they're putting up a password that's starred out with certain letters, so that way people can't figure out the whole thing. But that's just to prove that people can't get that kind of information if they're on the right networks, or if on a coffee shop or anything like that. So check for things, have certain things like VPNs, check for that green padlock if you're using web traffic, right? Because at least encrypt the link. But just make sure you're still going to a genuine website, because just because it has a padlock on there doesn't mean you're actually going to necessarily a valid site. So create a strong password, right? They should be long, they should be complex, they should be memorable, right? Special characters, numbers, alphanumeric, right? Those kinds of things. you know, excuse me, and if you're in a company or organization, there are technical mechanisms that you can implement to force it across the organization. And make it into, also put into a company policy as well. Don't use anything that identifies or personal to you. Don't use pet names, social media accounts, don't use birth dates, don't use anniversaries, don't use your favorite sports teams. Don't use the sports teams you hate either, that you're vocal about. Don't use those as your passwords or PINs, right? But, and also make sure the key thing is use a different password for every account. Because again, if your Netflix account, they compromise your Netflix account and get your password there, they're going to try those passwords across different things, right? They'll say use the same username, right? Your username is an email address. They'll use that password, but then once they figure out, oh, hey, they're on LinkedIn, they work for this company, this is the company's email address, let's try that to log in to things on the company site. And what you can do is to help, you know, remember all those passwords is you can use a password manager. Right. And the nice thing about password managers is that it'll not only store your passwords, but it also actually create passwords for you. And that, I mean, it's going to be passwords that you'll never remember. But that's what the idea of the password manager is, that the password manager is responsible for it. The only issue is going to be is that the password manager is going to be restricted to that particular device. Right. So if the password manager is on your laptop, you'll have to access your laptop all the time. Or if it's on your phone, you'll have to make sure you have access to your phone. So how do you know if your accounts have been breached already? So there's a site called haveibeenpwned.com. So pwned meaning owned. So, and then, you know, you're somebody, so someone's got your username and they figured out your password. So all you have to do is put in your email address, hit the button. And what it will do is if there's any sites out there that actually have your username and password on there, it will display up on here and it'll show you. And if you find it on here, change your password right away. Change your password immediately. All right, so this is one tool that you can use free. You don't have to register for this, it's free. You just put in an email address and check it every so often. So passwords are a weak link. So what can you do aside from just using passwords is you can put in multi-factor or two-factor authentication. Because now what you're doing is you're using two things to authenticate, not just one, which is your password. So that by doing this, it increases the level of protection against the compromise, right? Because it's going to be something you know, which is your password, and then something you have, right? And it's going to be something like a token. So a token can be like Google Authenticator, RSA, Okta, or some options. And what this token does is it's a set of numbers that rotates every 30 or 60 seconds. So unless they have access to that token, they're not going to get access to your site. So even if they guess their password, they have to get that token. So they have to compromise your laptop or your phone, or maybe if the token's a physical device, they have to get that physical device in hand. There's also, you can have verification codes sent to your phone. So like an SMS or text messages can be sent to your phone. And then again, it'll be either it's alphanumeric or a number of digits that they'll send to you over SMS. All right. You can have fingerprint or face, right? So like on phones, right? They went from fingerprint, now they went to face recognition. Now they're going back to fingerprint because, you know, with the masks and everything, so it's hard to get access to your phones, right? But the best way to do it really is out of the list of three is to get that token, right? To get that token and use that as a mechanism of authentication. So it is, and admittedly, it can get a little bit frustrating having a two-factor authentication in place, but what's more important, right? Protecting your account and making it harder for an attacker to gain access to your account, or letting the, you know, or having a potentially a weak password and allowing, you know, attackers to get right into your system right away. You know, so two-factor is something that you do need to use, and I mean, really, you should be implementing it across the organization. Right? If your organization is using something like Google Workspace, or if you're using Office 365, implement two-factor authentication. It's built into those. You just have to turn it on and enable it. And that forces all your users to use it. Right? And in this case here, back to KQED. So a few things that happened to them, right? So all their platforms, TV, radio, digital, financial, administrative platform, share the same username and passwords across the organization. That's a big problem. You should never share passwords or usernames either. Right? That should never be shared across the board with everybody, because then that gives you access to pretty much anything within the environment. Someone gets that information, they have access to pretty much anything in the environment. Right? And before the actual attack, the malware scanned the KQED network for weeks to identify the accounts that shared passwords. Right? So not only did they infect and put in ransomware, now they've stolen accounts. They've gotten the accounts and the passwords for that environment. So even if the ransomware aspect were to be fixed, they now have access to use accounts and passwords again. Then they can always come back and do things that they want to do again. But the nice thing is, and the good thing is that they did have some of their information on cloud-based services. And some of these cloud-based services require that, you have to have, your separate usernames and passwords. But it also depends on how you secure those, right? In terms of permissions and who has access to it, who doesn't have access to certain things. So there were levels, so the cloud-based services somewhat protected them a little bit, but still, it still caused issues in terms of username and passwords, right? And so from, again, a quote from the KQED security consultant, sharing passwords is a pretty easy way to shoot yourself in the foot operationally. Don't share passwords. Any questions? So I believe we have one more section to go. And again, if you do, what is your opinion on cloud-based password managers such as LastPass? I think these things, honestly, these are reliable. LastPass, what is the other ones that are out there? I can't recall them now. There are multiple password managers out there. Even cloud password managers are fine, I think, right? Because now you just make sure that the cloud provider that you're using has some level of security in place as well, right? Because now you're relying on them and trusting them to secure everything, and they should give you that information, right? They should inform you what they're using in terms of securing themselves and how they're encrypting data. They may not give you the full details of it, but they should have things like a privacy policy in place. They should have some level of, maybe some places will give you like their certificate levels or certifications they use for securing their environments. Are they using or following certain compliancy mechanisms like GDPR and things like that, right? So the cloud-based password managers, yeah, they're fine. Just make sure you use a trusted one, because there are many that are out there. But do some due diligence. Do some searches and look in those searches and see what are like most common places will give you like the top 10. And if the one that you're looking for falls in that top 10 across 5 or 6 different security sites or Computer World or other types of articles, then that's the ones that you want to use. Fingerprints-based passwords. I'm not sure how I feel, to be honest with you, about fingerprinting, fingerprint biometrics. They come in handy, right? Because it's very easy to do, because all you're relying is on making sure your fingerprint is correct. But it also depends on those fingerprint tools and what you do as so because if you get a little bit of a cut or a scratch on your finger, that could potentially throw it off. And then from a security perspective, you're reading some things that you would think are unimaginable or just out of the movies, and they actually happen, is a little bit scary. Like, because people can, those things like the certain biometrics can be bypassed because somebody got a fingerprint on a piece of tape, or they went and created those gel prints of your fingerprint, and they actually work. They've proven that those things work. Some of the newer technologies should, I think, prevent those kinds of things, but I think that fingerprint scanners and these face recognition things do need some level of improvement still before being fully used out there. Because there was an issue like with iPhones and some, I think either Samsung phones, where you could actually take a person's picture and put it in front of the phone, and it would unlock it. It doesn't do that now, because then they said, okay, well, we have to look at other things and recognize other situations. So I don't think that that's the case anymore. But in the past, when that first came out, people started complaining. People are going to try that. Let's take my picture and put it in front of it and see what happens. And I tried it a long time ago with my Samsung phone when I had a Samsung phone, and it worked. The phone unlocked just because my picture was in front of it. That's scary, so those are kinds of things that, biometrics, I'm still a little bit wary about, even though there are some improvements on there, but I still always will rely on that, making sure I have a strong password on my phone. I don't use a PIN, because the PIN is usually just 3 digits. I don't use the swipe lock, where you have to put a pattern in. Because those are things that people can figure out ways of figuring out where your pattern is, or if they just watch you once, do it once, and they know what your pattern is at that point. So yeah, great questions though, very great questions. And looking to see if there's anyone sharing our presentation. I believe we will. Yes, Kaylee says we will. So yes, we will share the presentations with folks. All right, so that's the last question that I see. So let's go on to the next session. Preventing phishing and malware, right? So we've talked about knowing what you have, right? Because if you don't know what you have, you don't know what you're going to be protecting. We talked about updating your systems, right? Because updating your systems is what's going to help hopefully protect you against those different types of vulnerabilities or attacks that could potentially happen. And then we talked about passwords, right? Because passwords is a way from the account perspective and the user perspective to protect your environment, right? But now you also have to look at what are some of the external factors, some things that are coming from the outside that could hurt and harm your environment as well, right? Because most of the stuff we talked about was internal to the organization, internal to the environment. But phishing and malware is something that's going to be coming from the outside, but there's things that you can do on your systems and internal to your organization to help protect against these types of things, right? Because phishing is still one of the top mechanisms of cyber attacks, where cyber attacks start. So over 90%. And they are getting more and more difficult to recognize, right? They are looking more and more like a genuine email. They're looking more and more like they're actually coming from that particular organization. Right, they're using their logos, right? They're using the same format that you would typically see. The email address actually looks valid and looks the same, and it looks like it's from that domain or from that particular person, right? So just really make sure this is actually coming from somebody that this is actually coming from a valid organization. But then also, what do some phishing emails do? They force you to act quickly, right? We have headline news, or great job of what you've done, or we didn't pay this invoice. If they don't pay this invoice, they're going to cut our electricity, so you need to go ahead and pay right away, right? But it's actually not coming from those people, and everything has been paid on time, right? And they may, again, just with that same thing with passwords, they may have done their research on you, right? So they may have called you or your organization or checked online to personalize the email. They may say, oh, hey, I just saw this recent news article that you released. This is great. This is awesome. This is, is there anything that I can do to help you with this? Because I have all this information to further and, make your article look even better. Right. But you need to pay me. You need, give me the routing number and the bank account number for your organization so that we can transfer some money. Right. But the goal of the attacker when it comes to phishing emails is to do whatever they can do to make that email look valid, right? To get you to click on that link, to get you to download that attachment that's there, right? Because that's their goal. That's what they do, right? And because they want to steal information, right? They want to steal information from you. They want to get your banking information. They may just want personal information. So that way they can try to figure out your username and passwords, or they may flat out ask you directly, what is your username and password? So we can get you access to that. Or they may say, reset your username and password. You put it in, and you keep using these different passwords. Now they're collecting a list of passwords that could potentially use. So some things to take into account when it comes to phishing. There are different types of phishing, right? Phishing is just one form. There's different types of phishing that do different types of techniques or different types of attacks, right? Because really what phishing is just social engineering, right? Social engineering, they're trying to get you to do something, right? They're trying to create a relationship with you in some cases initially before they actually do their real actual intent. Or they may just do what they're looking to do right off the bat. And that's what phishing in general is. It's untargeted, right? They pretend to be from a bank. They pretend to be from a shipping organization, right? They may use different things based on the situation that you're within, right? Maybe it's tax time, maybe it's a holiday season, so people are going shopping, the recent news stories, right? And the goal is like phishing. So like actual phishing, they take a net, cast out the net, and they try to catch as many fish as they can. So it's like, but then they're trying to just get whomever that they can into this. They're not looking for one specific type of person. Then there's spear phishing, right? Which is targeted, right? What's spear phishing? If you know actual spear phishing, right? People actually take a spear, they go into the water, they wait patiently, and then they throw the spear to catch that one fish, right? They're looking at that one particular fish. That's the one they're going after, right? So now they're actually looking to be like maybe a particular person, right? Or someone who's a head of or a particular type of organization, someone that you actually may be doing business with, right? And maybe the organization you do business with, but maybe not necessarily that particular person. But they're going to figure those kinds of things out. So they may do some level of research, right? Like we've seen in many cases, the CEO phishing, right? They go after CEOs, they go after someone a little bit, higher. And that's where we get into whaling, right? The big fish, even though it's not really a fish. But they call it whaling, right? Because it's highly targeted, right? So this is where they're really looking and doing some level of reconnaissance. They're actually monitoring this person, right? They're looking to see on their LinkedIn, their Facebook, they're looking to see, and this is something they could take months for them to do, so that to the point where they feel like they know you so well, they can interact with you. And they go after the high targets because that's what they consider high rewards, right? Because that's the big one. That's the big fish that they're going after. And these will be typically executives and the C-level people, because they're the ones who have direct access to the money, right? Or they have the ones who are able to say or do give a specific order. But remember though, phishing doesn't necessarily have to be just email, right? But generally when we talk about phishing, it is referred to always email, but there's also smishing. So smishing actually has to do with text messages or SMS messages, right? We get a lot of those where they say, oh, thanks for joining this team, and you click on the link and it goes to some place you shouldn't be going to. Then there's vishing as well via telephone, right? Because in most cases, they could start off with vishing, right? They're making a phone call, getting to know people, and they talk to you, and it says, okay, now I'm going to send you some email with some information. I'll send you the quotes and things like that. And you click on these links, and those links, or you click download the attachments, and they end up being actual malware. So the vishing could lead to phishing or smishing in terms of that. So just take that into account. It's not just phishing in terms of email. So what are things that you can do to prevent this? Having antivirus will help, right? Making sure your antivirus stays up to date is very important and very key, right? But also have antivirus for your mobile devices, right? Because if you do a lot of business, a lot of communication over your mobile devices, right? I'm sure when you're not in front of your desktop, you probably have your work email on your phone, right? Or you have some sort of communication on your phone. So you need to make sure your mobile device is up to date. Make sure you have some level of antivirus on there. There's free versions of antiviruses for mobile devices that are more than enough to keep you covered. Just make sure you use a reputable organization in terms of this. Right, so make sure everything is updated and have an AV up on your computer and mobile devices. Make sure your antivirus is updated. Make sure that all the applications on your devices are updated. Make sure accounts are updated. Right, make sure you have a strong password for your account. Make sure you have two-factor authentication set up for your account. But one key thing is, we're saying here if appropriate, but if you're in an organization environment, do user awareness training. Tell your users about that, because if your users don't know, then how are they going to help you protect you? How are they going to know about that they're going to get phishing emails, or what a phishing email is, or whatever a phishing email could potentially look like? But they may not know unless you do that user training. kind of, you know, something almost similar to this, maybe, but not as technical, right? Just enough so that they know. And there are tools out there actually that you can do in terms of phishing exercises, right? That you have control over. You can send these phishing emails to all of your staff and your employees, and then you get a report back on whoever actually clicks on the link on there. And then what do you do with those people? You go back to them and say, okay, you're going to sit through training. This is what phishing is. This is why it's bad. This is why it's not good. This is what cybersecurity means. This is what it means to have a strong password. This is what it means to have this and that for security of your organization. Right. And then, you know, maybe then towards the end of the year or the following year, you send it again and see who clicks on it again. If it's the same person, then you may want to do some more training on that person, but, you know, maybe have some sort of consequences as well, aside from just training.
You might just have enough space. You're lucky because people are jumping the links.
So other things that you can do to help protect you against some sort of phishing and malware is to set up DNS security, or what they call DNS filtering as well. So what is DNS? So DNS stands for Domain Name System. And what that basically is the internet's phone book, right? So when you look at a phone, right, and even on your own phone, what do you don't have a list of numbers on your phone, you have a list of names, right? And that name is associated with a phone number, right? Because that's how you're going to remember it. Or even when you look at a phone book, and probably dating myself in terms of phone books, if people still use phone books. I actually still get phone books for organizations, but it's basically that book is you're looking up the name, right? Once you find the name, there's the phone number that's associated with that name. And that's basically what DNS is doing. Every system that's connected to the internet has what they call an IP address. It's a number. You know, consider that IP address the phone number for that computer, right? But the thing is you're not going to remember to go to google.com or yahoo.com or microsoft.com by using an IP address and, you know, a series of numbers. You can remember it by the name. You're going to type in google.com, yahoo.com. But that's what happens is basically that name is being sent to a DNS to look up what's the actual IP or the number that's associated with it. And then it directs the traffic to that number based, you know, traffic based on the number. So every unique domain name is going to have a unique set of numbers. So like globalcyberalliance.org is going to have an IP address associated with it. And the one you see on there is not the one that's associated with Global Cyber Alliance. That's one we just kind of made up. Right. But the thing is that all these domain names that are out there, there's billions and billions of domains that are out there. But how do you know which ones are good and which ones are bad? You're not necessarily going to know that yourselves unless you go through and look it up, you know, manually look it up. But it's also estimated that of the 200,000 plus new domains that are registered on a daily basis across the globe, up to 70% of those may be actually intended for malicious activity. But how do you know what that 70% is? And that's where DNS security or DNS filtering comes into play. So you use tools that are out there like Quad 9, for example. So you, on your laptop, you change your DNS to point to Quad 9. This is 9.9.9.9. You know, or you do it on your router, your home router, put that in so that it protects all your machine. And the goal of these services like Quad 9 is basically when you go visiting these domains, Quad 9 is going to check, is this a good domain or is this a malicious domain? It's a malicious domain, it's going to block you from going and visiting that domain. So that way it's protecting you, right, against this malicious activity. It just blocks it and you won't even connect to it. But if it's a good domain, it's going to let you go through. So that way you don't have to worry about it as a user. You just have to make sure you have the Quad 9 set up on your DNS. Right, and this is a tool that's in our toolkit. So if you go to the toolkit, you go under phishing and malware, prevent phishing and malware, you'll see Quad 9, and then Quad 9, and then from there you can see actually how to set it up and how to configure it on your environment. Right, and Quad 9 is not the only option. There are other options out there as well that you can consider using. So from the KQED perspective, right? So some things that they ran into. So the over-the-counter antivirus software, wasn't able to handle this ransomware attack, right? Because previously we said only 10 out of the 60 out off the shelf ones, or over the counters, the ones you just buy from your local stores or your electronic shops or computer stores, you know, right? Only 10 out of 60 of those actually recognize this. Right. And then this was an actual targeted attack again because of what KQED does, right? They're a journalist organization. They're a small organization. So they felt that these were a little bit more susceptible and easier to attack. Right? Because of the way that everything was set up, right? All departments and employees share the same networks, right? So the employees were connected to the TV stations, radio stations network as well. So that's why everything got impacted so quickly. Right. I mean, yes, it was easy to access everything and get to everything and point to everything and things like that, and allow for, like they said, quick collaboration. But the collaboration was more important than the actual security. And then the other problem ends up being is that being admins on their own machines, they could do whatever they want. They could install any software. They can install any tool that they wanted to do. But then who was responsible for making sure those tools stay updated? Right? If they no longer needed that tool, did they remove the tool? Probably not. So there was lack of control over those systems, which potentially causes issues as well, and can cause issues. Right. So as from the quote from the KQED radio anchors, initially we all had this attitude: the show must go on. But after that surge of adrenaline and can-do attitude subsides, you're just exhausted. It's a work around fatigue, right? Because they can only do this for so long. Right? Being on pen and paper, recreating everything that needs to get recreated that was lost. And they no longer had access to this type of what the things that they had access to and that information. Eventually you're going to get tired of it, right? Right? You have that initial surge, like the show has to go on. We got to do what we need to do. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving, keep moving. But eventually that's going to wear off. Right. So you have to make sure all of these things that we talked about so far is going to be very important and very critical in terms of setup and configurations. All right. So again, Q&A. So if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about so far, please feel free to post any questions you have. We have about 15, 17 minutes left for this session. Then we're going to continue the next session tomorrow, starting at the same time. In that session, just to give you a little what's coming up, so we're talking about backups and recovery. We'll talk about encrypting data. We'll talk about some tools that you can use to communicate securely. And then we'll any questions that you have, and if we have time, maybe I'll go ahead and show you the toolkit as well. Tomorrow, and some of the aspects of the toolkit. But for right now, since we have about 15 minutes, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take those questions. I don't see any questions unless I'm missing something.